pleasant, I should say, winter's afternoon. You can tell that spring's around the corner. One of the positives of the climate emergency is that spring comes earlier. If you look around your garden or look around the parks where you live, you can already see the trees blossoming. Now, I wonder why it's so hard to join the dots. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with those dot drawings you did as a child. You went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, and hey presto, there was a rabbit or an elephant or a giraffe or a car. Very simple. All you had to do was join the dots and know your numbers. Not hard, even for a small child. Now, if I invited you to a birthday party and there were 40 people at that birthday party and there was one cake, normally you divide the cake in relatively equal portions for each person with the birthday cake. Now, if I took half the birthday cake, or about 40 to 45% of the birthday cake, and gave it to one person, everybody else would be up in arms, would be complaining. Why did you give her or him 45% of the birthday cake? What about the rest of us? Well, currently, we find ourselves in that situation in Australia, if not most parts of the world, especially the Western world, representative democratic world, where for far too long we have been sold the lie, especially during the last 50 years, during the neoliberal revolution, that somehow, that's right, somehow it's okay to give 45% of the cake, the Commonwealth, to 1% of the population. In any other field of human endeavour, people would be complaining. But the fascinating thing about Australia and most, as I said, Western democratic countries is concerned, is the fact that people are not complaining about the real reasons why so much of that cake goes to the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, and the 8% that are part of the investment class, and the rest of the population fights for the crumbs which are brushed off the corporate table. So why do we find ourselves in this situation? Is it because we believe in the parliamentary representative democratic dream, that somehow our vote, giving a vote to a representative to make decisions for us for a fixed 3 to 4 year periods, will somehow address the problem? It's a little bit like asking the fox to look after the chook hen. Now, obviously, the fox does look after the chook hen for one very good reason: for itself, to meet its greed. So here we are, 21st century Australia, instant communication. There may be people around the world watching this YouTube presentation, extremely low budget presentation, but that has the potential to reach millions. I know what's going on 10,000 kilometres away, just as it happens because of modern communication. But when it comes to thinking about why we find ourselves in this predicament, that at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, we have the majority of Australians' living standards, not just their standard of living economically, but standard of living psychologically, going backwards. Now obviously, everybody is well aware that the Commonwealth is not divided equally among the population. But most people tend to blame the other, the person they can see, for the dilemma they face. It's always the fault of the person who speaks a different language, or has a different religious belief, or comes from another part of the world, maybe a migrant, maybe a refugee, maybe asylum seeker. Maybe it's people who wear funny hats. There's always somebody we can blame. Not individually, but as a society. Now, if there is one corner of the sinking blue planet that should be living the life of Riley, it's the 28 million people living on the continent which is currently called Australia. We make up 0.3% of the world's population, and I think we are around the 12th most profitable economy. We sit on huge deposits of some of the most needed natural resources on planet Earth. But we have 1 in 6 children living in poverty. We have the ridiculous situation of private charities raising money to put Australian children through a public education system which is theoretically paid by you and me, the taxpayer. We have 1/3 of the population eking out an existence on social security benefits, not welfare, which tends to be a prerogative term, but social security benefits. We have a social security system to ensure the most vulnerable members of society don't starve and theoretically have a roof over their heads. We have now reached the situation where having a roof over your head is becoming increasingly difficult for an increasing number of Australians. So why are we turning on each other? Why has hatred between different segments of Australian society rearing its ugly head? Why can't we even acknowledge, as a society and as a community, this country belonged to other people before the brutality of the colonisation process changed forever the fate of the traditional owners of this land? Why can't we accept the 1/3 of Australians living on social security benefits need extra support? Why do we have 32,000 registered charities in this country trying to raise funds for organisations and activities which should be provided through our taxation system, not reliant on private charities, no matter how effective these charities are. The fact is, it's becoming increasingly difficult to join the dots in this country. Every day, facts are no longer relevant. We've reached a stage in human development where belief systems dominate our everyday activities. A little bit like medieval Europe. Belief systems. Facts are irrelevant. Why can't we accept that a climate emergency we face, each and every one of us, is dependent on human activity on this planet? We don't accept anything because we've become so marginalised and disenfranchised that as a people, as a country, we have lost the ability to join the dots that explain the reason we find ourselves in this situation where hatred has become the new currency on this continent. A hatred which is driven by political actors whose only thing they wish is power, who are willing to exploit the divisions that are in society to empower themselves to ensure the status quo continues. Whether it's divided nation or the Liberal Party or the National Party or sections of the Labor Party. Now the facts are simple, extraordinarily simple. Successive governments and most of the major political players in Australia today are quite happy to sell our future and our children and grandchildren's future to a minuscule minority who are laughing at us as we squabble among ourselves, fighting for those illusory crumbs which are occasionally brushed off the corporate table. While hatred continues to be the main currency in our society, we will never be able to join the dots. When the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication own the means of communication, own the virtual platforms which form such a major part of so many Australians' existence, it's no wonder that you can't see the dots, let alone join the dots, to create the picture of the type of society we find ourselves in, the type of society we are today at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. We have a minuscule minority which determines parliamentary legislation. Even the most minor reform which affects their power and their wealth is strongly resisted to such a degree that they have the capacity to change governments, let alone government policies. Now you would think that in such a situation where we're tearing each other apart, that
we would look beyond the parapet. Have a look at who's pulling the parliamentary strings. Have a look at who's acquiring wealth at our expense and the expense of future generations. Have a look at who's destroying this country in order to maximise their profits. Profits which in the majority of cases go into the pockets of shareholders. We have reached such a situation where corporations now dominate most aspects of everyday existence. It's all very well for small business to cry about wages and regulation. But the fact is they find themselves in that situation because governments have allowed corporations to dominate almost every facet of our existence. Through the privatisation of public assets, we have removed the only power that could force competition in an open marketplace, and that's a strong public sector. If there is no strong public sector, we will continue to see the domination of every aspect of our existence by unaccountable corporations whose major responsibility is to their major shareholders. Not to you, not to me, not to the country. So we have a real crisis. While those who pull the puppet strings continue to pull the puppet strings, and the majority of the population not able to see the dots, let alone join the dots, to expose who profits from the neoliberal philosophy and ideology which has driven us to a situation where hatred and division has become the major currency in this country. This is not a time for depression. It's not a time to become privatised, to withdraw into yourself. It's not a time where you think you are the problem. Ultimately, we are part of a society. It's all very well taking medications to assist your situation or accessing therapy, but the fact is we are not isolated individuals. We are part of a community. We are part of a community that is constantly exploited, and we need to draw our attention not to the other in society who is easy to pinpoint and rail against, but we need to draw our attention to a system, an economic system which is dominated by a minuscule number of people. If we don't do that, we will continue down this pathway of hatred being the main currency in this country. I'm not depressed about the situation. I'm not even angry about the situation. I'm not even resigned about the situation. The fact is, while people continue to join the dots, we will be in a position where the current negative sentiments which dominate the society can be pushed aside as we work to ensure that this country's common wealth is used for the common good of the people in this country, both First Nations and the rest of us, not to enrich the major shareholders of unaccountable corporations who have been allowed by successive governments to dominate our economic system to such an extent that 1 in 6 Australian children live in poverty, that private charities need to raise money to send Australian kids to public schools, that we have extraordinary waiting lists in the public health sector, that there is no competition in the economy because everything worthwhile has been privatised. The ball is in your court. Ultimately, it's up to people like you to make the difference. You do have choices. You can ignore what's happening. You can put your head in the sand. You can shrug your shoulders and say, what can I do about it? Or you can join that struggle to ensure that we join the dots and encourage people to understand the current situation we find ourselves in is not the fault of the other, but the fault of an economic system of governments which have allowed a minuscule minority to dominate every aspect of our day-to-day existence.